All right, everyone, welcome back to the Kyle Anone Show. I hope everybody had a great holiday vacation, got some nice time with family and friends, and here we are back full force to debunk the most potent lies of the U.S. empire. And on today's show, we got a big one. In the waning days of the Biden administration, his officials are looking to craft a narrative to shape their legacy. And it looks like Jade Sullivan has some pretty nasty ideas for us. And he's really going to try to sell us on what the Biden administration has supposedly achieved in the Middle East. And so here we have some clips from an interview between Jade Sullivan and Ian Bremmer. And if we could play the first clip here, we'll talk about what Sullivan thinks has happened in the past year in the Middle East.
You and I have spoken a lot more about the Middle East than we had before. I'm wondering, in terms of biggest surprises, is it how much the Israelis have reestablished escalation dominance? Is it Iran and the axis of resistance looking like a big deal and then imploding? Is it what just happened with Assad and the rollout in Syria? Where would you stack this is the thing that we probably least expected?
Yes. Every one of those pieces has been maybe not surprising directionally, in the sense that, one could see the ways in which Israel, frankly backed by the United States in terms of much of what it has accomplished, was taking the fight to its enemies. One could see the weakening and the fracturing of the axis of resistance and the weakening of Iran. And one could see the pressure on Assad, particularly because his two main patrons, Iran and Russia, were distracted and weakened. But the speed, the scope, and the scale of the remaking of the Middle East in this short amount of time, I think you'd find very few people who could have predicted all of that, and that we would be sitting here in December of 2024 with the picture looking the way that it looks.
So at the beginning of that clip, we really get the tone set for this entire interview, which is actually over an hour long, which is very happy, jovial even in their attitude, celebrating what's happened over the past year in the Middle East. And they talk about the fracturing of the axis of the resistance and the downfall of Bashar al-Assad. But what they leave out is really important as well. And that is, over the past year, the U.S. has backed Israel's genocide in Gaza and unleashed hell on earth for the poor Palestinian people who live there. And this has all been backed by the United States. We get a very important admission in there from Jade Sullivan, which is much of what Israel accomplished in the past year, they've accomplished with the help of U.S. aid. And certainly the U.S. likes to tout the amount of aid that we've given Israel, but what goes often left unsaid is that the U.S. is actually a required piece in the Israeli war machine. We've had Israeli generals say that they couldn't conduct the operations in Gaza for more than a few months without U.S. help. And this U.S. help is ongoing. And actually, we had very interesting development over the weekend when the Biden administration announced they were going to approve additional $8 billion in military aid for Israel. And this isn't just meant to be a short-term boost to their stockpiles, but rather providing bombs and missiles and artillery shells for Israel so they could continue to wage the wars in the Middle East, in Lebanon and Gaza, year after year after year into the future. And of course, this is post-election. And so we could very much see that this is an embrace of the Biden team, Joe Biden, the president himself, as well as Sullivan and Blinken, embracing this. It wasn't just about elections. It wasn't just about trying to appease the Israel lobby, our APAC influence in the United States, to get their support to help win the election in November. No, this is philosophical. They truly believe in this deep, deep support for Israel. So let's talk a little bit, we have Jade Sullivan celebrate, but what has actually come about in the Middle East over the past year, and what is the current status? And of course, we're going to talk about the suffering for the Palestinians, but there's another big, pretty large story that developed over the weekend. I actually covered it for the Libertarian Institute. Institute. We had an Israeli soldier that was rushed out of Brazil to avoid a war crimes investigation. And I write, an Israeli soldier was immediately evacuated from Brazil by the country's embassy after a Brazilian court proposed investigating the man for committing war crimes. In response, Tel Aviv instructed its soldiers to be careful about what they post on social media. And so, this really shows that all of what Sullivan says about all the accomplishments, there's actually been some blows to the U.S. and the Israeli reputation. At one point in time, you couldn't imagine a country arresting a U.S. or an Israeli soldier for war crimes. And now it seems like something that could very well happen to a soldier who is just trying to enjoy a vacation in Brazil. Also, there's an interesting note in that story too, and I think it shows a lot of insight into the thinking of the Israeli government and the culture that they're trying to form. Because for the past 15 months, the Israeli soldiers have posted video after video after video, hundreds of them online, showing them committing war crimes in Gaza. Often the destruction of Palestinian homes or the looting of Palestinian homes, but sometimes more serious, including murder, bombing of innocent civilians, sniping of innocent civilians. These are all posted online with no repercussions, and the government in Tel Aviv didn't really seem concerned about it at all. And even though this did bring some negative publicity and pressure on Tel Aviv, and I think the reason why that was is because the behavior has to be normalized for the average IDF soldier to be okay with the genocide that they're participating in. And so for months and months and months, Israel has allowed their soldiers to post this. Now they're finally starting to restrict what their soldiers are posting online because it's going to be a long-term negative for Tel Aviv, as people won't want to participate in the war if they can't go on vacation in the future. And so now let's talk about what Israel is doing in Gaza to the Palestinian people. And again, what Jade Sullivan is celebrating here. We had this video from an American doctor on the rating of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, and her name is Tanya Haj Hassan, and listen to the horrors that she describes.
After the Israeli military raided the hospital, people were blindfolded and undressed. Patients on crutches were put on the ground as Israeli soldiers took celebratory pictures with the surviving healthcare workers in humiliating positions. The hospital was burned down, and Dr. Al-Safiya was taken, we believe, along with many colleagues. I speak to you today, like so many healthcare workers and citizens around the world, filled with grief, with anger, with frustration, and frankly, with disbelief. Disbelief that all of our repeated firsthand and utterly damning testimonies have still not moved the world to meaningful action.
And I mean, I really don't have a lot to add to her comments there. I think the horrors that she depicts are just so descriptive. The only thing I want to say is, I'm in disbelief that Jade Sullivan, the Biden administration, rather than trying to, cover up their Middle East policy, are actually celebrating and going out there and just bragging about what's happened in the past year. Now, I have one more kind of update recently in Gaza showing the horrors, what's going on. This is a tweet from my colleague at antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp, where he reposted an article that 8th baby in Gaza freezes to death as Israeli kills 88 people in Gaza. And Dave points out that now this is just another day. This has been happening day after day after day in the new year. Palestinian babies freezing to death. Now, why is that happening? Because after a year or so of these people, these Palestinians in Gaza being displaced from their homes, their tents are beginning to wear out. These were just a lot of times canvas tents. And so now they have holes in them. The water is getting in, and the babies who are sleeping next to their mothers at night are actually freezing to death. I mean, these are unbelievable horrors that we're witnessing. And of course, these problems could all be rectified almost immediately if Israel allowed the aid that was piling up outside of Gaza to enter the strip, but they're not allowing them to do so. And this is all the more, important to point out and striking that this is going on. And at the same time, we have Sullivan and Blinken and other U.S. officials actually touting their achievements when it comes to what they've gotten Israel to concede over the past 15 months of how much aid has gotten into Gaza. Now, of course, this is absolutely insane. In December, an average of 71 aid trucks entered the strip per day. Now, remember, that's a population of over 2 million people. And when we're talking about aid, sometimes we're talking about tens. This isn't all just pallets full of food or medical aid or something like that. A lot of it's other kinds of aid, fuel to run some of the generators at some of the remaining medical facilities and things like that in Gaza. So, just an absolute nightmare is going on. The U.S. is bragging about how much aid Israel is allowing in as the Palestinian babies are freezing to death. The UN says 500 trucks need to enter Gaza per day. The U.S. says 350 trucks need to enter Gaza per day. 71 trucks enter Gaza per day, and Sullivan and Blinken celebrate it. I mean, it's absolutely insane and it's absolutely disgusting. Now let's move on and talk about some of Sullivan's other remarks. Let's play the second clip here.
Does the picture today look at least modestly more stable than it did a year ago, or does it look worse?
I've been reflecting on this question because the thing about foreign policy and geopolitics is that when good things happen, often bad things follow. When bad things happen, often good things follow. And nothing is ever fixed in time. There's always something around the corner. So is there a huge opportunity right now? Absolutely. In that sense, the possibility of a more stable, integrated Middle East, where our friends are stronger, our enemies are weaker, that is real. And in fact, Iran is at its weakest point in modern memory.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are huge risk factors, and you can see them maybe most in living color in Syria, where the Syrian people have the chance to build a better future in a post-Assad world, but where there are very evil people who are looking to take advantage of this current moment, starting with ISIS, but other terrorist and jihadist groups as well. And it will take collective resolve, wisdom, and willingness to act in order to ensure that we don't see in Syria what we had previously seen in Libya, but on a larger scale where the geography is actually even more dangerous for not just our interests, but the interests of our friends and allies. So I think we're at a moment of profound opportunity, but also a moment of profound risk, and that means that we have to handle this situation with clarity and effectiveness. And the interesting thing is this comes in the middle of a presidential transition in the United States.
Which makes it harder for you.
It makes it harder because...
I'm thinking specifically Syria, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it harder because, and this is something that my successor, Mike Waltz, has actually said, other countries, other actors, particularly our enemies and adversaries, look at transitions as moments of opportunity because you have this seam between an outgoing administration and incoming administration. And so the imperative on us, both the outgoing Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration, has to be to lash up more tightly than is typical, to spend more time together than is typical, and to try to ensure we are sending a common, clear message to both friends and adversaries in the Middle East. And we have endeavored to do that over the last few weeks. Obviously, we disagree on a lot of things under the sun, including perhaps on certain aspects of long-term strategy in the Middle East or elsewhere.
So I think this clip is so telling about Jade Sullivan and how little he understands the world. And so again, he's talking about opportunities here. This is a celebration. This is what the US and Israel have achieved over the past year. And he really centers it all around that Iran is in a weakened state and the axis of resistance is fractured. And of course, the main piece to this puzzle is the overthrow of former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who for a long time had been allied with the Russians and the Iranians in a war he was fighting against jihadist groups in his country. Now, at the beginning of December, those jihadist forces finally won the war and did so with the backing of the United States, Turkey, some of our other Middle East allies, and even the Ukrainians provided drones for that HTS offensive. By the way, HTS is the name of the organization led by Abu Muammar al-Julani, Mohammed al-Julani, who is now the de facto ruler of Syria. When he took power, not only is his organization designated a foreign terrorist organization by the United States government, but he actually had a $10 million bounty on his head, which of course the US has since removed. Now we're looking to cozy up to him and ensure that he keeps a break in Iran's, continuous land stretch of Shia-controlled territory from Iran, southern Iraq, that formerly existed in Syria, and then to southern Lebanon and Hezbollah. Now, another thing that Sullivan and other members of the Biden administration, such as Amos Hochstein, right now are celebrating is Israel's supposed achievements in southern Lebanon. They've got the Hezbollah, the main militia, the main Shia fighting force in Lebanon, to agree to a ceasefire deal in which they withdraw to an area north of the Litani River. And so this is a pretty good chunk of southern Lebanon that is now not doesn't have Hezbollah fighting assets in it. And in this territory, Israel is ongoing destroying villages. They're preventing any Lebanese from returning to their homes. This is an ethnic cleansing campaign in southern Lebanon. And is this something that the U.S. wants to celebrate? It absolutely shouldn't be, but of course Sullivan is here. Now, another thing that he mentions there is he says sometimes when good things happen, bad things follow. And I think the most appropriate example here is, of course, the U.S. law and policy of supporting Islamist groups in Afghanistan against the Soviet war occupation of that country, which did probably help lead to the downfall of the USSR, but also directly led to the 9/11 attacks in New York City that resulted in thousands of dead Americans. And so now that we've put a terrorist in charge of Syria, there's some real opportunities for some bad things to happen here, but yet Sullivan and the Biden administration are embracing al-Jawlani, the terrorist that now controls Syria. And of course, with all this celebration, what often gets left out is what is going to happen to the Syrian people. Sure, maybe from Washington's perspective, there's some geopolitical benefit to fracturing the Shia axis of resistance that opposes Israel, but at what cost to the Syrian people? Jade Sullivan says we don't want to see Syria turn into another Libya. Well, what happened in Libya? It's an absolute failed state now. There's rampant crime. There's huge amounts of human trafficking. People at one point post-U.S. supported revolution in Syria were being sold in slave markets. The country is still over a decade later an absolute disaster, and thousands of people are dying unnecessarily every year. And yet Sullivan just kind of mentions, we don't want to see this happen, but it wouldn't even be a possibility had the U.S. not bat this war, bat these jihadist groups fighting against Bashar al-Assad. Now, there's this other thing happening in the Biden administration that's really interesting, where they keep talking about the risk of these jihadist groups taking over in Syria and what that poses. And typically they refer to the Islamic State, and they don't always essentially leave out that al-Jawlani was actually the former deputy commander of the Islamic State before he broke off and formed the al-Nusra Front, which eventually became his current organization, HTS. But going back to the current situation, they keep talking about the power vacuums and the risk for these terrorist organizations. And in fact, we have a similar statement from our Department of Homeland Security Secretary. So let's play that clip.
What impact has the fall of the Assad regime in Syria had on the threat environment here at home?
We're very concerned about the instability that has resulted from that, and whether, in fact, it creates some space for the reemergence of ISIS in Syria. And ISIS continues to seek to radicalize individuals outside of the Middle East and throughout the world, and that is something that we are, of course, also very focused on.
Yeah, and we have the Biden administration trying to walk this very difficult tightrope between we're happy that Assad is gone, but also there's this increased terrorist threat that we now have to deal with. So one more thing from that last clip that I have to mention, of course, is this celebration of Iran at its weakest. And I have to say, it's very important to realize that victories in the Middle East often seem to be very fleeting for America. So say we are happy that we finally toppled Saddam Hussein in the Iraq war, but after his government was gone, now we have a Shia government, a Baghdad that's more allied with Iran than before. And in the Sunni areas of Iraq, rather than having straw man Saddam Hussein controlling things, jihadist groups, including ISIS, have festered in that territory. And that's become a real problem that the U.S. actually had to reinvade Iraq to deal with. And so it's not as if anything the U.S. has counted in the victory in the Middle East has really amounted to anything in the past several decades. So now let's move on to one last clip from Sullivan here discussing the transition between the Biden to the Trump administration.
You've had several very constructive meetings with the incoming National Security Advisor. And frankly, my sense is that the alignment in how both of you see the world is a lot more similar on a bunch of policies than most people in the public would presume. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think it's fair at an elemental level of each of us being totally committed to the American national interest, each of us recognizing that we have real adversaries in the world, one of them being Iran, and we have friends and allies who we need to stand up and defend and back, one of them being Israel. And so that gives you a basis to work on. Now, I have been myself, President Biden has, the rest of our national security team has been subject to lots of criticism from President Trump's team over the course of the past years. We've criticized President Trump's statements and record on foreign policy, so it's not like we see everything the same way. But at this moment, on big ticket items, when we need some degree of smoothness and continuity in the handoff from one administration to the next, I think both the outgoing and incoming administrations see the bigger picture.
And so I think this clip is so telling, and I think very accurate. Actually, we just had another interview where Mike Waltz actually sat down with Mark Levin and said the same thing that Sullivan did there, where fundamentally the Trump policy in the Middle East is going to revolve around the U.S. Viewing Israel as a friend that we need to support and Iran as an enemy that we need to combat. And so, with these two statements, we can really see here that there's not a lot that's likely to change in U.S. policy going forward. And so before we wrap up the show today, I had a clip that I found from our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, discussing his legacy in the Middle East. And let's play this clip on.
Do you, Secretary Blinken, worry that perhaps you have been presiding over what the world will see as a genocide?
No. It's not, first of all. Second, as to how the world sees it, I can't fully answer to that. But everyone has to look at the facts and draw their own conclusions from those facts. And my conclusions are clear.
So there, Blinken just denies that there are genocide going on. Of course, he's in disagreement with a lot of countries around the world. The International Court of Justice, which is the World Court at the United Nations, the International Criminal Court has indicted Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and the former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for charges of war crimes for conducting the genocide in Gaza. And we also have a report from Amnesty International that says Israel occupied Palestinian territories. You feel like you are some human. Israel's genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, where Amnesty International was the first, but not the only international aid organization, many of which are celebrated in the United States, who have labeled Israel's crimes in Gaza a genocide. I mean, we've already talked about the horrors going on there, the children freezing to death. There was another story today reported by Middle East Eye where an Israeli dog was sent into a home where Palestinians were sheltering and actually mauled a woman so bad that she had a miscarriage. And these horrors just come out day after day after day. And it's very easy to become numb to them over the long term. But when you look at these officials trying to celebrate what they've done in the Middle East as a victory and dismissing the claims as genocide as that's nothing, and I don't care about the way the rest of the world looks at it. Well, they might if the rest of the world starts to take up more war crimes accusations, not only against Israel, but of course against the U.S., who has provided that critical support with the latest batch of that $8 billion worth of munitions that the Biden administration is now going to send to Israel. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the latest episode of the Kyle Anone Show.